Good evening in the room. I think we have about 60, 70 people in the room. And good evening to everyone joining us online. I think we have about 150 when I last checked online too. So great audience joining us for this evening's lecture. My name is Richard Menzies-Gow. I work at Informa PLC. I'm one of the directors here. Just to connect the dots, because I've had so many people ask me already this evening, if you're wondering what the history and connection is to Informa, this very building actually was where UBM PLC was based. And many of you will know that Dame Helen was uniquely connected to UBM as its chair for a number of years. And about 5 or 6 years ago, Informa and UBM combined businesses. And whilst the UBM name has disappeared, the connection to Helen remains very strong inside the company. And I know there's quite a few Informa colleagues here today in the audience, and I know there's even more online joining us. So we're delighted to host the 7th edition of the Helen Alexander Memorial Lecture. We've held it here now for a few years at 240 Blackfriars, held in Helen's name and celebrating the impact that she had on the world of business and education. As always, it's fantastic to see, as I say, colleagues from UBM, but also I know from the Economist, from the University of Southampton, from the CBI as well. I think there's some representatives here to name a few, alongside many friends and family, including, of course, Helen's husband, Tim, and some of her children. I think Nina and Greg are here, and I'm told Leo's filming in Ireland, but he is online watching somewhere. So welcome to Leo too, and many other members of the family who are here. We're also, if you've been to this lecture before, you'll see in the last 7 years we've been very lucky to have attracted some amazing female leaders to the lecture to share their experience and knowledge. Anything from Christine Lagarde, I think, who was the first inaugural speaker, to Dame Emma Walmsley, to Dame Carolyn McCall, to Baroness Manoush Shafiq. And today we're truly lucky to have another pioneering female leader with us in Dame Amanda Blanc, the CEO of Aviva PLC, who I've no doubt, I'm sure Amanda will tell us, in some way along her journey to the top, benefited or learned from the path that Dame Helen paved in years past. We're also very lucky to have Zanny Beddoes back with us, the editor-in-chief at The Economist, I think the first female leader to hold that position, who's going to manage proceedings in her distinctive and charismatic style that we've come to know very well the last few years. So a warm welcome and a big thank you to everyone for joining us. And without further ado, let me hand over to Zanny.
Thank you. Is this on? Can you hear me? You can't hear me? Yeah, you can hear me. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Informa. It's very nice to be here again. And it's great to see so many familiar faces at what is genuinely one of my favorite evenings of the year. And I really feel that now with the 7th one of these evenings, this is really now an institution. So I'm delighted that you've are happy to carry on doing this with us, and of course the University of Southampton. And it's great to see the Alexander Suter clan, minus the Hollywood actor bit, but lovely to see you all in the extended family. It's really nice to see all of you here, and so many of my colleagues too. And those of you online, welcome. What we do here is we have a conversation with a prominent woman on business. And Amanda, you absolutely, we've sort of stretched the definition of business. Christine Lagarde is brilliant in many ways. Business may not be exactly what she's central to. But in your case, we are spot on. I mean, you are, and I'm not particularly flattering you, you are one of the most prominent business leaders in Britain, full stop. Certainly one of the most prominent female business leaders in Britain. And for those of you who don't know, Amanda runs Aviva, as we heard, FTSE 100 company, an insurance company, one that she has turned around fairly comprehensively in the last 4 years. I said to you, I thought somewhat tentatively and politely earlier, it wasn't in terribly good shape when you took over. And she says, no, it was a disaster. So I want to start by talking about that. And then I want to talk a little bit about how you, given that experience, see the turnaround job that Britain faces, because I think a day after the British Investment Conference, that would be a good place to go. And then finally, I do want to talk about, although this is very much women on business, I think you are extremely interesting and vocal on women in business. And I just want to give you a bit of a sense of that in the audience if you don't know, but Amanda is a forthright champion of diversity, and she has called out in no uncertain terms sexism in her own company, which we will hear about. And you resigned, you may remember, from the Welsh Rugby Union board. And I venture to suggest that the Welsh Rugby Union board would not have got into the trouble it had got in if you had stayed on there. So we're going to talk about that a bit too. So that's the kind of highlights of where we're going to go, and then hopefully this is really just a conversation. But I wanted to start with the turnaround that you did or have done at Aviva. And so now that 4 years in, stand back from it and give me a sense of what you think the ingredients are to doing a successful turnaround, and what is the nature of the leadership you needed to bring? Because you were an industry insider, right? You spent your life or your career in insurance, and one might not think that someone coming from inside the industry was necessarily the right kind of person to do that sort of a turnaround. So tell me how you did it.
So, well, first of all, thank you for having me here, and thank you for the introduction. And it's really lovely to be here with you, Tim, Nina, Greg, and to Leo online. Thank you so much for that. So what can I say? What are the ingredients for a turnaround? Well, first of all, Aviva was very broken. It had, I think, 3 dividend cuts in the previous 10 years. The share price was in a terrible place. The investors were really, truly fed up. The board was divided. And I actually joined Aviva as a non-executive. And of course, from the outside, it didn't look quite that bad. And then, of course, once you got inside, you're like, oh my gosh, this is a bit of a disaster. And within about 8 weeks of being there was a board meeting, and the board was divided on the strategy going forward. And the chair stood down. So the chair that had appointed me stood down, and I suddenly found myself as a non-executive on this board. So I ended up leading the search for the next chair, who was actually already on the board. He was the SID. And then he subsequently needed a new CEO, because the CEO had a disastrous capital markets day. He'd created this complicated structure. Nobody understood what their roles were. Nobody understood what their accountabilities were. Previous CEOs had basically decided to abandon performance management. They didn't need objectives. Nobody needed to know what they were doing. It was unbelievable. And he said, the new chair said to me, well, you've sort of been a CEO for 16 years. How do you fancy throwing your hat in the ring? So I sort of did that. So what did I find? No objectives. Nobody was clear about what they were doing. The strategy was just completely bonkers. I mean, nobody knew what it was. Nobody could really articulate to me. The ExCo was being run as like sort of individuals, and that is not a very effective way of running a team. So everybody was fighting with everybody else. It was not a great team. There was loads of stuff going on. So what did I do? Well, first of all, I said, okay, what is it that we actually need to do? I'm a big believer that in business, if you're not in your top 3 in your market, and particularly in financial services, you can't influence what's going on. So let's look at where we are in our markets, and where we're not top 3, let's exit. So first thing, focus the portfolio. Not that difficult. Everybody said I couldn't sell all these businesses, but anyway, we said we were going to do it. So 4 weeks after I became the CEO, I stood up in front of the market at the half-year results and said I'm going to focus the portfolio. The second thing that investors were telling me was there's too much debt. So we needed to reduce the debt. Okay, well, those 2 things sort of help each other. If we can sell businesses, we can reduce debt. And then the third thing was, how do we transform the performance? So within the first 18 months, we sold 8 businesses for £8 billion. The market cap of Aviva is about £13 billion. And that unlocked everything. And that very simple strategy of saying, we are going to do this, we're going to sell this business in France, which nobody said could be sold, Italy, Poland, Singapore. Actually, the first deal was done within the first 6 weeks. We did it in about September the 25th of the first year. And with that, I then had the confidence, because I had money. So I could do the second objective, which was to delever. And those were very strategic things. So in terms of ingredients for the 22,000 people that worked for Aviva, they were sort of irrelevant. They didn't see that. But the third bit was convincing them that this was a brilliant business. Underneath all of this noise, there was a lot of fantastic businesses that had #1 positions in their market. If you looked at the UK, we were #1 in workplace pensions. We were #1 on the advisor platform. We were #1 in general insurance. We were #3 in health. We were #2 in protection. We had great positions, but it was all being sort of like clouded by all of this nonsense. So I then said, okay, well, how do you build great performance? Well, you have to build a great team. So slowly I started moving people out of the Exco. And I started with the first very important job, which was the Life Company CEO, and it's now called Insurance, Wealth and Retirement, but at that time it was called Life. Doug joined, and then I started from there. And today, there's only one remaining person on the Exco of 13.
Wow.
So the whole Exco changed. We simplified the strategy. We told the market what we were going to do. And very, very importantly, everybody got objectives. Everybody was clear about what it is they were going to do. And we had 4 simple areas. We were going to be focused on the customer. We were going to be efficient. We were going to grow the business. And we were going to do it in a sustainable way. And everybody had an objective that either had all of those 4 things or one of those 4 things. Even the person greeting you at the reception desk, everybody knew really clearly what they were going to do, and then I monitored the hell out of it.
I think I can see already how you managed to do this. There was a description.
It's not actually that complicated.
There isn't, but there's a wonderful phrase that I've read a couple of times that apparently you're called the Queen of Execution, which if it was the King of Execution would be slightly alarming, but that's what. So you set the objectives and then you, to use your words, monitor the hell out of it. How do you do that?
So I didn't trust anybody, right? And I know that's not a great place to be. Apart from my chair, who obviously I trusted implicitly. And it was his job to get the board in the right position, which he did, and it was my job to get the business in the right position. I trusted him implicitly. We were, and even to today, 4.5 years later, you will not get a cigarette paper between me and him. We will have a debate about things, but we are absolutely clear. We know what we're going to do. But in many respects, from an execution perspective, it's not that hard. But I didn't trust anyone. But I did say to the team, who should be my chief of staff? Because that is a role that is going to be with me. It was the middle of COVID, remember? It was July 2020. Nobody was in the office. So I had to look. So I was coming in. There were a few other people coming in. And
so you never actually met the people that you're working with face to face?
No, all of this was done. All those businesses were sold without ever leaving the country.
Wow.
In France, in Poland, in Italy, in Singapore. They were all done over Zoom.
They definitely must have thought of you as the Queen of Execution.
In a way, it made it easier. You didn't waste time on planes. So I appointed a chief of staff. I said, who's the most talented person here? And there's a guy called Andrew Dinwoody. And I met him, and I did do this meeting. We were like 6 feet apart from each other at the time. And I said, I'd like you to be my chief of staff. He was in finance. He said, I don't know whether I really want to do it. I went, are you serious? I'm asking you to be my chief of staff. So anyway, he went home, and his wife obviously must have said to him, are you completely mad? So that evening, about 9 o'clock, he called me and he said, no, I'd love to do it. I'd love to do it. So he and I basically sat with a big piece of paper. I never remember, is that A3 or A5? I'm never sure what it is. And we basically wrote down everything that we needed to do. And he and I just did it.
Wow.
And slowly but surely, we brought people in who we trusted. We brought them in, and that's
so now you've got this
big piece
transformed the piece of paper. You've ticked all the boxes that need to be ticked. Now you've got a company that is poised for growth. What is the difference in approach that you need once you've done the transformation in your company, but more broadly? Is it a different skill set now?
Well, in many respects, when I was appointing the CEOs of the individual businesses, so the general insurance business, the life business, I appointed them with a view that they could transform the business, because I knew there was plenty of growth potential. I knew that the UK is sitting on £5 trillion worth of wealth. I knew that we had a great brand. I knew all of these things, and I just needed people who could come in and do that. And from a mindset perspective, the biggest difference is actually confidence. So people can grow a business. It's not that difficult if there's opportunity. But if you're not confident enough, you're constantly chasing, looking over your shoulder, thinking something's going to go wrong, thinking that, you might get told off for doing something. So we needed to give the business confidence. You start with people, and then you get those people to work out what the opportunities are, and then really sort of go for those opportunities systematically. So you go for the biggest opportunity first, and then you systematically go for those opportunities. And look, when I joined, the share price was £2.63, I think, on the day that I joined. It's sort of £4.82 today, and we've returned £9 billion in capital and dividends over that time to our shareholders. So I mean, And that's not me. I mean, that's the people in Aviva, right? That's a significant
I think it's partly
improvement.
Well, in large part. But one more question about the business, which is something that I ask every business leader right now, which is one of the big drivers of change for all of us is AI, and presumably in the insurance industry particularly. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so I was at the investment summit yesterday, and I think it was either Eric Schmidt or Larry Fink said, you know, this is the biggest opportunity that the world is ever going to see. You know,
could have been either.
I mean, it could have been either, exactly. You know, post the Industrial Revolution, you're sort of thinking, oh God. So I went back to the team today and said, what are we doing about this? Anyway, no, I didn't. So what are we thinking about AI? So first of all, we've always used AI. We use dynamic pricing to price a lot of our motor insurance products, our health products, our home insurance products. So we're using machine learning all the time, and we've got 300-400 data scientists that work at Aviva. But this is obviously the next stage of that. So we're looking at where we can use large language models in things like medical underwriting, in things like claim summarization, Copilot, which is basically the way the developers are working. We're using it, and when we speak to experts that come in, they say we're probably upper quartile in terms of financial services, in terms of the type of projects that we're doing. But I would still say there's a heck of a long way to go. The opportunity is massive, but I actually think that it's massive. People always say it's the contact center people, I don't think the risk is to those people. I actually think the risk is to the actuaries, to the underwriters, whose 90% of their job can be done by the AI. People still want to speak to people. And so a lot of our people that we have on the telephone, they still need to be there. If somebody has a motor claim, they've had a serious accident, or they've been diagnosed with an illness, they want to speak to somebody. They don't want to speak to a bot. They want to speak to somebody who's going to give them reassurance. And it's getting that combination right.
That's really interesting. I mean, some people are saying that actually a bot is better at being empathetic than people.
Well, I mean, sometimes it depends on your organization.
Let's turn to, because there's so many things I want to cover. Let's turn to Britain. And you said you were at the investment summit yesterday. I would venture to suggest that Britain could do with the kind of turnaround that you've just done at Aviva. I mean, a sort of sense of confidence, a sense of turning around. We've got this sort of malaise in the country right now, I think. And the new government is trying to do that. If you were either in the Chancellor's shoes or indeed the Prime Minister's shoes, or advising them, and I'm sure you are, what would you say to them they ought to be, to go back to your turnaround of the business, focusing on? What are the areas that they need to focus on?
Well, I mean, I think they're talking about the right things, growth and investment. And you won't get growth without investment in the economy. For too long, I think there's been a sense of what is really going on in the UK. I mean, I've been on the last two Prime Minister's Business Councils for Boris Johnson and for Rishi Sunak. And, I used to go along to those meetings and you think, I wasn't really very clear about what the priorities for the country were. I think here we have a very clear sense of priority. It's about how do we free up investment to deliver growth. And, I genuinely believe that there is a lot of money available to invest in this country. I was over in Canada last week. Canadian pension funds are investing. They have loads of investments here in the UK. But it's easier for them to invest in the UK than it is for me. I mean, that's wrong. So we've got to make sure that Aviva and L&G and all the insurance companies and the banks, it's as easy for them to invest in this economy as it is for externals to invest. So what do we need to do? We need clear priorities around what is going to be our green transition plan. What is going to be our infrastructure plan for the country? How are we going to get the vibrant cities around the UK powering on all cylinders? Think about the University of Southampton. Now, I think number 11 in the UK. We've got brilliant universities, very, very talented academics. AI was invented here in the UK. We should keep those things, keep culture, keep the things that we do with media. We need to be confident about the strengths that we have, find them, and then work out how we're going to build on that. But it can't just be the south of London, south of England, it can't just be London, it has to be across the UK, and you have to have a clear plan. In many respects, the Inflation Reduction Act in the US was a very, very clear plan of how they were going to deliver their green energy transition. Now, of course, that may change very much on November the 5th, but it was a really clear plan. Everything followed that. We could do with the same sort of thing.
It was also very expensive.
It was expensive,
very big,
but it's going to be expensive.
But so that's an interesting. You've said that the government has the right sense of priorities, but does it have the boldness that is necessary? I mean, something I'm kind of constantly asking myself, whether it's in regard to the budget that's coming up, whether it's tax, whether it's spending, whether it's the kind of role of government. Are we being too incremental and insufficiently really bold about, okay, what is the UK's role and how much needs to change for the UK to do that?
But I think if you've only got to go back to September 2 years ago to find out what happens when you go for...
Well, that's if you're bold and stupid. Right.
Well, but I think everybody's thinking, everybody's worried about
have we overlearned
history.
that lesson, I guess?
Well, hopefully, right, hopefully. But we are going to need to take risk. We are going to need to be bold. And we are going to have to invest in areas, you know, things like health, social care. They all will need a lot of thought, and we are going to have to be bold in terms of how we do it. I mean, look, I don't know what's going to be in the budget. I've absolutely I really don't know. Of course, we all are thinking about what it could be, but I really hope that we get a sense of what the priorities are going to be, because I genuinely feel that private capital is ready to stand by. But of course, there are areas where we can't invest in high-risk areas unless the government is fully committed to that. You know, think about hydrogen, carbon capture, you know, your ports, green steel. Those are the sort of areas we can invest in: offshore wind, onshore wind, the things that are proven. But where it's sort of unproven, you are going to need the government to put some capital at risk as well. That's what we need.
And what about regulatory problems? I mean, people talk about the huge amount of potential pension saving that is there, the huge amount of capital that you guys have that could be invested in the year. So one is having the right regulatory environment to sort of, are there the projects there to invest in? Another is, have we got the right framework about the sort of rules that you need to follow to do it?
So first of all, I think before we get to the projects, you've got to fix planning. Planning is the major, it's a major issue, and ticked off. You've got to get the right construction skills. You've got to be able to put a spade in the ground, and you've got to be able to start work within a very short period of time. And then you've got to match the projects to the money. So the government have know that they've got to do that. In terms of the regulatory environment, I mean, there was a lot of talk about that yesterday. You saw that at the investment summit. Not just the financial services regulators, but all of the regulators, the CMA, all of them. They've all got a role to play. And I do genuinely think that we have to accept that when you move into a risk environment, you are going to see some things fail. And
that's what worries me a bit.
And we don't like fail, right? Yeah, I mean, 2008 has frightened everybody off fail. So capital is held to prevent failure. Everything is about stopping failure, not allowing those firms that have got the right controls and systems to be able to grow. So I genuinely think that the regulator also needs, they've got our regulator's got a secondary growth objective, the FCA and the PRA. They need to fulfill that. So in a way, everybody needs to be held to account. And that's what the government need to do. They've got the power to bring people together, to hold people's feet to the flame, and they need to do that.
And do you think there is a sense of joined-upness and urgency in the government? I mean, this is a government with a huge majority that one would assume, therefore, can have an enormous amount of stuff done. I have to say, this isn't anything we haven't written. The first few months have not been stellar, I would say, in terms of sending a signal of joined up determination to fulfill a mission. Is that just teething problems, or is that...
I mean, imagine you've been in opposition for that long. And, I can remember going to see the Chancellor when she was when she was Shadow Chancellor. And, they had about, 3 or 4 assistants, right, helping them. Yeah. And then you move into the Treasury, and you've got thousands of people telling you all the things that they've thought that they should do for the last goodness knows how long. It must be slightly overwhelming. And so I can imagine that when you've been in opposition for that long, and there are many of the cabinet that have not been in ministerial positions. I mean, interestingly, the one person that has sort of hit the ground running. If you think about Ed Miliband, there has been a series of things, which is right, he sort of knows how to work, the system knows how to work the department, whether you agree or don't agree, that, that's what's happening. I think they need a bit more of that, clearly. And so I would say you've got to give them a chance. Yeah. That would be my view, because, I mean, it is a huge majority, and, and I think that they are, I sensed yesterday definitely more confidence. But, I think also, dare I say it, the media have got to help.
Ooh, our role is to hold to account, but be fair-minded.
Be fair-minded, exactly. Yeah. But at least, and I don't mean by not calling out on things that are wrong.
No, I think what you're right about is that there is such a focus on, dare I say it, somewhat superficial things, and insufficient
on the stuff that matters.
Yeah.
No, I think this promoting Britain that needs to be all of our role, not stupidly, but there is a lot that is good about Britain. I mean, a lot. But we very, very rarely see that written.
Okay.
I'm not talking about by you.
No, that's a fair point. I want to talk about your role and what you've done in terms of calling out sexism before we get to questions, because this is really interesting. And I know this is generally women on business, but this is you've I think. Am I right in saying it's not something you particularly wanted to focus on, but you feel that you've had to call it out? And I just want, there's a couple of anecdotes for those of you who don't know them that I'd like you to tell. And the first is your first shareholder AGM. Do people know this story? Okay, there's enough shaking heads. So tell the story of what happened at your first shareholder
So it was
AGM.
the first AGM. It was at the Queen Elizabeth Centre here in London. And, the AGM, you prepare for all sorts of questions. Like, you're going to get a question on, investments that you've made, performance of the business, your strategy. So the board went onto the stage, and the very first question was from a shareholder that stood up and said, well, it's very good to see that there are a few women on the board, because we obviously know that women are very good at the administrative tasks. And then he went into whatever the question was. I don't even remember, because at that point I was like, well, what does that mean? And then the second or third question was from somebody that told me I was not the man for the job, and that I should, basically put on a pair of trousers and face up to it. And then there was another. So this went on. So I had three comments on my gender, and at the time you're sort of sitting there thinking, what the hell is going on? But of course, you're in the middle of the shareholder meeting. So you're thinking, I've got to get through the shareholder meeting. And my chair was next to me. And we were sort of communicating. And I said to him, you need to say something. Because it's wrong. And anyway, he did. He said, look, if there is another, if we have another question like that, we will be asking you to leave. Anyway, that was the last question. It was the end of the meeting. And as I walked back into the room where all my team were, they were all and there were a lot of women in the team, and a lot of men as well, and Andrew was here, and he said that was just appalling. And there was an FT journalist in the room, and it was Ian, and he wrote an article on it immediately. And I was flying out to Canada that evening, and I thought, I'm done with this. I mean, this is just wrong, plain wrong. And I've never written about a gender topic before, ever. And and I was the government's Women in Finance champion. But I thought, if I can't speak up about it, then who is going to speak up about it? So I wrote a LinkedIn article on the plane going over to Canada. And when I landed, I thought, I'm just going to post this article and see what happens. And I posted it. And I think to this day, it's had like 1 million+ reads. I've had literally thousands of comments on it from women and men all over the world that said they've had exactly the same experiences. Other FTSE 100 CEOs who said they'd had exactly the same experience at their shareholder meetings. And you know what? Since then, every shareholder meeting has not had any of those comments in it. Because now we put something in our notice which basically says, if there is any of this behaviour, you will be asked to leave the meeting. But it was phenomenal that I had to do that. I was a bit nervous about doing it because obviously, I don't want to be seen as being the female CEO of Aviva. I want to be the CEO of Aviva who is a woman. But there are times when you have a responsibility where you have to speak up, and I felt that was the time to do it.
Do you think that was an aberration in your industry? Insurance is a pretty male-dominated industry. Financial services is in general, right?
Financial services is in general. I think those particular shareholders actually had behaved in the same way at other meetings that were non-financial services. So those were shareholders. I think as far as sort of women in the city are concerned, and particularly in financial services, clearly there is some very bad behaviour. There's no doubt about that. The Treasury Select Committee did a call for evidence last December, and I went to speak to Treasury Select Committee about that. Another great experience in my life. But they spoke to women who had had really, really bad behaviour, and they had private sessions. And even to the point now where at Aviva, we will say if we have an event, we will have security there. We will issue, when we issue intermediaries, our brokers, our customers, instructions to the event that we would expect the event to be, we expect behaviour, we need to moderate alcohol intake, those sort of things. not because we think it's fun to do that, but because we've had experience where we feel there's a need to do that, so that we set the tone for the event, and others do that as well to make sure that this is a business event, this is not an opportunity to get drunk and badly behave.
And just listening to you say that, I was thinking of how appalled Helen would be if she sat, was listening, witnessing this behavior.
I mean, it's 2024.
It's 2024, but even, I mean, that's the sort of worst of the, well, perhaps not the worst, but is right up there in terms of terrible behavior. More broadly, is your sense that in financial services, but you can even range more broadly than that, that how much progress have we made? I mean, how much progress have we made? Clearly, in representation terms, there's still a huge way to go. You know, there are still far too few women leading FTSE 100 companies. But where do you, when you're kind of now in going about your business as a female business leader, do you think it's still a long, long way to go, or actually a lot of progress has been made?
I would love to say that there's great progress. I actually think women on boards, there is huge progress, which is driven by Helen and the other people that have subsequently taken on that role. But still, if I think about how many SIDs are there, how many FTSE women chairs are there are more. But if then you look at the FTSE 100, there are 10 female CEOs in the FTSE 100. If there were 10 men and 90 women, what would the reaction be? It would be outrage, right? But what is going on? I'd like to think that there was progress, but honestly, my experience, and if I wouldn't like to tell you about some of the emails that I received following my attendance at the Treasury Select Committee, the language that I was called and the things that were said to me were absolutely appalling. There is a lot of people who do not want women in senior positions. They just don't. And there is a lot that needs to be done to change the mindset. For example, if you were to pick up the press, and I don't anymore read the comments below the line, but the first comment usually, if there's a picture of me and something that I've done on Aviva results or whatever, the first comment will be, what is she wearing?
Absolutely.
What does what does her hair look like? Why 57, she looks 67. Those are literally the comments that will be the first comments underneath particular, and it's really hurtful. And I used to look at it and think, oh my gosh, and I used to go to the team and say, got all these comments, and they say, stop reading it.
I'm laughing because when I hear you say that, I used to, whenever I guess my equivalent of that is going on TV. It's the first time I went on Question Time, I looked on Twitter afterwards, and the first comment was, does this woman know what a hairbrush is? Which is perfectly good. Thereafter I stopped watching.
But it's not acceptable, right? It's not acceptable.
It is absolutely
You're a clever woman, you've been really successful, and it's okay to say those sort of things about you. It is not. I mean, Twitter/X is, really, obviously.
Don't read it. But there is a question, and then I'm going to open to the audience. There's a question of what you think your responsibility in your role is to this. And this is something I also ask myself. You don't want to be, I'll say it about me, you don't want to be known as the person who goes on about diversity all the time. It's like, but do you have a sense of responsibility given the position that you have now? And if so, what do you think you should be doing?
Well, the government have given me a responsibility in making me the Women in Finance champion. So I feel like that's a mandate that they gave me. And, I did speak to Rachel about it in the very first week after her appointment as Chancellor, because it's a Treasury appointment, to say, is this something that you want? And she was absolutely, this is very important to me. I want you to carry on. Because obviously, if people are not interested, then you're not going to do it. So I have that sort of, if you like, formal responsibility. But then, there is a responsibility that I feel. I've got 2 daughters, and, I do feel that I have a responsibility to them, to all the other women, like the women in the room today, but also for diversity generally. Like, I'm from a Welsh mining valley. Both my grandfathers were miners. There's a socioeconomic point as well. There's lots of different areas which I think, but you can't fight everything. I've been asked to look at gender, but it is hard. It is hard, but I do think you have to talk about it. But I do try to balance that with people trying to identify that Aviva is actually a brilliant company, and there's actually, I've done a good job of running Aviva. So you're trying to balance those two things, because what I don't want to do is for Aviva to become associated with with, as we were last Christmas, woke. It's not woke to have diversity policies, but that is somehow how it is perceived by some parts of the press.
It's not, but is there a sort of, I'm going to put this in a way of, is there some way that some elements of diversity policies have gone too far in that actually, you can debate about whether targets are a good idea, whether quotas are a good idea. You can debate about whether mandatory diversity training is a good idea. Some of this stuff may not be. It may actually backfire. So there are kind of, the way you approach sorting out the business is presumably the way you approach this too, which is what works, what doesn't work, what makes sense.
Exactly, and it's all driven by data. It's all driven by data. So effectively, I think the point at which you say, is the job done, is when you're basically seeing long lists that have got 50-50 men and women on it, then short lists that have got the same, and then the best person gets the job, right? The best person always has to get the job, but it's driven by data. And so I think there are some things that have gone too far. I'm not a massive fan of, the unconscious bias training and those sort of things. In my opinion, they don't work in the same way as taking a methodical approach to, do we have an exco that represents the population of this business? Does it look the same? I was over in Canada last week, and, I swear I walked around the business, and it's so diverse. The business is just so diverse, and everybody is just getting on with it, and nobody really talks about it. It's just how they run the business. I think when we get to parity, we can stop doing that, but we're not at that point yet. So we have to keep monitoring and measuring. I do recognize, though, in some instances it can go too far, but I would say that, I don't think we're at that point.
Interesting. I could ask endlessly questions about that, but I'm now going to open up to the audience. And first, we're going to have some questions from our students from the University of Southampton. So Charlotte Mendelsohn, where are you, and what's your question?
Hello, Dame Blanc. My question.
Please call me Amanda. And I think you're going to get a microphone so that the people online can hear you.
My question to you was, as I hear you speaking, I love to hear how authentic you are and how you share your experience. But how do you sort of battle being, say, overly authentic, or having people tell you, oh, you're maybe too outspoken, say, as a woman? Because even in my experience as just a student, sometimes I feel as a woman, when you put your ideas across, they can be shot down. So how would you sort of battle that? And also, how do you remain authentic to yourself?
So I think there is only one way to be, and that is yourself. You can try to be a different person, but I honestly feel that you've got to maintain true to yourself. And remembering where you come from, I always remember where I've come from, and I always remember the people that have helped me, and and how important that was from when I was your age. And there have been certain people that have helped me through my career. You should never ever forget that. In terms of how you get your voice heard, I think that it is about just really thinking about your communication. So one of the things that I do spend a lot of time doing, and my team are here, is sort of rehearsing how I would speak about something. So when we do results presentations, or when we do, even for the so I was on CNBC at 7 o'clock yesterday morning, and at 7:15 yesterday morning, Andrew and I were in the reception of CNBC, and he was grilling me like I was just about to get grilled by the people. But never be afraid to rehearse and to make the mistakes in the rehearsal. And it doesn't really matter whether that's a big meeting or a small meeting. I often think that people think that you can just stand up and just get stuff done, make it look easy, without any practice. You can't. I promise you, the biggest myth in life is that just people get on and they just get there. They really do not. They have to work really hard at it. So I think how you communicate and thinking about how you communicate, it's about how you really work on that, and thinking about the words that you use, and thinking about the audience that you have, and adapting your style according to that audience, but always stay true to yourself.
Is it all right if I ask a follow-up question?
Well, you've got the mic, so I think you can.
You. My follow-up question was, then how do you stand out when you also, within a company as well, most of our students are looking out for graduate roles. So how also do you sort of create that aura of leadership and also stand out as a character? So I would say, and I do quite a lot of the speakers for schools, and I go to schools and I talk about this, which is just fantastic. You've always got to have somebody remembers you by.
So is it what you were wearing? Is it a story that you told? Is it the smile? You've got a lovely smile, so I'm sure people will remember that. So it's just, you've got to think about that. You've got to stand out from the crowd a little bit, because otherwise everybody does look the same. And I don't mean that in a physical sense. When you're looking at recruitment, or everybody's the same. So if I'm having meetings with the grads that join Aviva, or the interns that join Aviva, you're always trying to think, I always say to them, just something to remember you by. What would that be? Is it a hobby that you have? Is it something that you do, with your family? Is it your family? Is it something that you can remember by? So I would just say, think about what's going to make you stand out from the other people around you. And that's not in a competitive way, just what are they going to remember you by?
That is really good advice. I'm just going to note, those of you who are watching online, if you have a question, I can actually see those questions. There's this fantastically whizzy Informa technology that I think I've mastered. So if you write in your questions. But in the meantime, let's hear from Sofia Nikolova. There's the microphone just coming.
Hi, Amanda. So my question is, as one of the few female CEOs in the insurance industry, and as you have already mentioned, you have encountered significant challenges, and thank you for sharing that with all of us. However, what advice would you give to young professionals, particularly women who are looking to break into male-dominated industries, just like the financial services?
So I would say that actually at the point of entry, this is really interesting in financial services, there is parity. It's 50-50 men and women. And it's a very dynamic. And by the way, I've said bad things about some areas of financial services. Of course, 99.9% of people that you spend time with are absolutely phenomenal and wonderful and do a meaningful role. And insurance is a great career. So I'm also promoting. But I think that what happens is, as you go through your career, for various reasons, women get either they have a family and then they feel that they can't come back because maybe the paternal the policies are not right, or the family situation is not right, or whatever. That's when the problem starts to materialize, and then there is more male domination than there is at this early stage. But what I would say is, as a woman, make the most of the first years of your career in terms of establishing yourself, and then should you choose to have a partner and have a family, you have to have a very grown-up conversation about thinking about, how are you going to do this? Now, Aviva has a brilliant, I think, paternity policy, or which allows, or parental, we call it parental leave policy now, which would allow equal parental leave to the fathers and the mothers, or however you want to describe it, or the mothers and the mothers, whichever way it is, and have that big conversation about who's going to do that, and then think about how you're going to go back to work, because that's the point at which you lose women in certainly in my experience. And then the other point is, the pipeline. Make sure that you've got a clear development plan. You know what you want to do. You've got a good sponsor. We were talking about sponsorships earlier, and that you're always thinking about that and take the opportunities that are given to you. Quite often, I see the women in our organisation. They will sit back and they will allow others to take the opportunity. I would say, if you're given an opportunity, it's never the right time, ever. I've never met anybody who says it's a perfect time for me to do something different. It never is. Take the opportunities that are given to you. Sometimes they'll work, sometimes they won't. Learn from the things that don't go so well, and just build from there.
Very good advice. This is great. Robbie Suchodolski. Where's Robbie? Oh, Robbie's right there, 4 rows back.
Given your most impressive career, given your impressive career to date, what would you say is your most memorable moment, whether it's related to change in policies in Aviva or just in general?
So I think it's really hard to have one memorable moment, because I'm really lucky that I get lots of different opportunities to do brilliant things. I mean, I would say if it was this week, I would say it was meeting the King last night, which was probably the most memorable thing I've ever done. So I mean, that was really memorable, because I've never done that before. But I get I'm very, very lucky that I get lots of opportunities. Generally, the thing I'm most proud of, which I think might be what you get to, is really what's happened at Aviva. And when I look out at the Aviva team and see what they've achieved and just think about where the business was and where it is today, and just their faces. I was over in Canada last week, and as you're walking around the business, people are waving at you, and just that just sense of real belonging. We had we have a Voice of Aviva survey which we have every year, which measures our engagement scores, and we had the scores last week, and our engagement scores are 91%. When I started, they were about 67%. So things like that is just that's when you know that people are really engaged. They really want to come into work every day. And that makes me feel really proud. And so I would always say it's about the progress that the business has made.
Thank you.
There was a chap called Tom from the University of Southampton who had a question, I know. But Tom, I'm afraid I don't know your last name, so I can only just introduce you as Tom. Tom Tatum, question for you.
Thank you. Hi, Amanda. Given your recent involvement with sort of the WWF and your recent DBE, how do you see the role of the financial and insurance services sector changing to address growing climate concerns? How will you balance sort of meeting long-term financial goals with your commitment to driving systematic change for the environment?
Yeah. So, well, first thing about an insurance company is that if climate change continues to happen in the way that it's happening today, we will not be able to insure a lot of things. You've seen it, in Canada. You've seen it in the US. You've seen it here in the UK. Flooding events are more frequent. We've got 110,000 houses in the UK that have been built on floodplains. That is just going to get worse. So insurance is really dependent on dealing with climate change because otherwise things just become uninsurable. And of course, we have both sides of the balance sheet. So not only will it become very difficult for us as general insurers, we also have the opportunity to influence that in that we have a £400 billion balance sheet, so we can invest in businesses that are either helping the transition or in businesses that are part of the transition today, so sustainable finance. So I think we've got a huge role to play. And of course, you mentioned WWF. For many years, people really didn't talk about the damage to biodiversity, and biodiversity is actually such a core part of climate change. Everybody was talking about CO2 emissions and the damage that was doing. Nobody was saying what damage was being done to biodiversity, and actually that was almost causing as much issue as anything else. So we at Aviva, we were one of the first to write a climate transition plan on biodiversity. How would we invest in biodiversity? We worked with the WWF on that. We have bought forestries in Scotland. We've looked at the peatland. We've invested in those areas. And businesses that want to offset their CO2 emissions will obviously want to invest in those funds that we've bought those businesses in. So I think we have a huge role to play, and I'm part of the what's called GFANS, which is the Mark Carney initiative on global financial firms. And it's quite incredible actually that a little company like Aviva, relative to the BlackRocks and all the Citigroup and all those big companies that are on there, Aviva is probably one of the most leading companies, and this is nothing to do with me. I'm going to take no credit for that. Aviva has always had a deeply, deeply entrenched view that it is really important that we look after the climate that we're living in, and had good plans towards that. So I just feel like I've taken on that mantle and carried that on, but we have a very big role to play. Hopefully that's answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely brilliant work you've done so far. Thank you.
That's a great question, and if we have time, we'll come back to more of that, because the whole sustainability question is really interesting. There's questions now pouring in. So one from San Rashid. Where do you stand on progressing as, quote, specialists versus, quote, generalists in the business world?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think if we think about the way that the business operates at the minute, you sort of have to be a little bit of specialist and a little bit of generalist. If you think about some of the topics we've spoken about tonight, so I have to be able to talk about financials. I'm not an accountant. I'm a history graduate, just to be clear, and not a very good one at that. But anyway, I was a history graduate. But you have to be able to talk about AI. You need to understand technology. You need to understand data. So I think there was a time when you'd never have imagined that a data scientist could become the CEO of an organization, and yet, you would now see those individuals running big organizations, massive organizations, and you see it just particularly with the US, the sort of Magnificent Seven, if you like, will all have come from that deeply tech route. I do, though, think that standing back, and I would say this, wouldn't I, that being a generalist does allow you to think about all the elements of the organization in harmony with each other. And, you know, I've worked with very, very brilliant people who are deeply technical, but if you were to put them in a room like this to do this conversation, they would just not want to do that. And if I think about, and I should have talked about it at the beginning, one of the key areas of success is the ability to communicate. I think that ability to communicate really clearly, really simply, is probably the secret sauce of my leadership style. Like, other people will have different secret sources, but mine is the ability to be able to communicate simply and clearly.
I think on the basis of 45 minutes of listening to you here, I would attest to that too. I think the entire audience would. That's absolutely you. But you are. There are, you know, many people can communicate well. You really do communicate remarkably well. I mean,
But I will put that down to, so the funny story is when I was like this big, I used to go to chapel in Wales, and it was a Baptist chapel, and my mum, you know, it used to be a very big thing that we used to have every year, this thing called the anniversary. And at the anniversary, you used to get the opportunity to do a recitation or play the piano or sing, and I did everything. I played the piano, I sang, I did the recitation. I loved that, and from a very small age, that I did do that. So I was always very confident.
So you like the limelight?
It's not so much liking the limelight. I'm not frightened of it. Yeah. I'm not, so, because, you know, a lot of CEOs, if you think about the analyst presentation that we do, and we've got one tomorrow, we've got a sort of big analyst presentation, they're sort of terrified about that presentation. So they'll sit behind a desk, or they'll have the notes, and they're terrified. And quite a lot of them will say to me, how do you do your videos and all of that sort of stuff? And I said, with a lot of practice. Like, practice, but you've got to feel confident in being able to do it. So I don't not like doing it. I do like communicating, and I do think it is very important that all 22,000 people in Aviva understand exactly what we're trying to do. So, I mean, too many strategy presentations, I mean, like, they blow my mind. When you look at them, I'm like, what does it mean? You know, what does that actually mean? And the consultants will come in, and they'll, sorry if there's any consultants in the room, and they're trying to sell you stuff, and I'm sorry, I just don't know what any of that means. Somebody said to me today, we had a meeting, and she said, I'm reimagining this. I said, well, what does that mean? I mean, I'm not being funny, but like, what does reimagining this? And she looked at me and she went, oh, right, yeah, I'm sorry. I said, stop talking like that. What is it actually? You know, just like talking really simple language, because then people understand you.
Yeah, I can imagine you must be absolutely terrifying to do this presentation for.
No,
questions from the audience here? Yes, back row, or second to back row. Lady there, yeah.
Hi. You've talked a lot about confidence, both in terms of Britain and in terms of yourself. And I think focusing on confidence for yourself is one thing, but how do you build confidence within your team, especially when you've driven such widespreading change and you've introduced new leadership? So how do you encourage confidence within your team?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm a big believer that when you employ somebody to do a job, you have to let them actually do it. So constantly checking up and, you know, making sure that they're doing the job that you've brought them in to do is not the right way. So you have to empower the team. But of course, you always do that with control mechanisms. So I have regular one-to-ones with all of my team. Even 4 years later, there is not every 2 weeks, I have a regular one-to-one with my team. It may only be 10 minutes, like what's going on, what are the key issues, how do you know? And the other thing is, when something goes wrong, it's having the response mechanism, which is not what the hell happened. It's like, what can we learn from that? Because honestly, I would say we have learned more from the stuff that we've done wrong than the stuff that we've done right, and we've done a lot of stuff wrong. But if people are frightened to come to you and say, actually, this hasn't gone the way I expected it to at all, they will not have any confidence. And, you know, so building that confidence in people that it's okay to make mistakes. When I recruit people into the team, I always say to them, I do not really expect anything from you in the first 6 months, because I expect you to just listen. Listen to what's going on, find out what the organization is all about, you know, understand what you're dealing with, and then start to act. Now, of course, I didn't have that luxury when I started, because because of the situation the company was in. But I'd been on the board for 6 months, so I did know the organization. But you do have to give them confidence. And honestly, it's such a motivator. I get that from my chair. He's got confidence in me, I know he has. It doesn't mean to say he doesn't challenge me, but it gives me great confidence then that I know he's got my back. And I've definitely got the backs of my team.
There was another question there, Daniel, yeah.
Daniel Franklin from The Economist, and first of all, thank you for a brilliant session. How Helen would have loved this. It's fantastic. You said that it was easier for a Canadian pension fund to invest in Britain than for a British one. I wonder if you could elaborate a bit on that. Why is that, and what needs to be done to change it?
Yeah, so I think we're probably at the point where the change has happened, but it's a very technical thing called Solvency UK reforms, which you don't want to know about. But effectively what it means is that if we are investing in a company in the UK, we have to hold a set amount of capital against that should something go wrong. And up until this point, it's been quite punitive for us to do that for certain industries. Things with what we call highly predictable income, so like offshore wind farms, that sort of thing. A Canadian pension fund can come in, can do the investment, and doesn't have that capital treatment. So effectively, it was less punitive for them than it was for us, which is of course wrong. And so that we now have what we call Solvency UK reforms, or SUC, aptly named by the PRA, and those rules will come in place at the end of this year. But this is one of the hangovers of Brexit, dare I say, in that financial services is obviously plays a very, very important role in the UK. But nobody came to look at the rules surrounding financial services until about 2 years ago. We're 8 years after Brexit, and so we're still trying to work out and unpick some of those rules where we were abiding by the European rules when effectively we needed our own way of doing it. So that's what that is.
Any more? Yes, last question here from the audience.
Thank you. First of all, good evening, and it's an absolute privilege here today to hear you speak. And you'll allow, hopefully, a long-winded question. You spoke about sexism, and I speak for a woman who's probably not a chair or a CEO. And sexism never comes empty-handed. It brings in racism and ageism and everything else to go with it. What advice would you give someone who's possibly, a school teacher or a nanny who's either too old or too young? How do you speak up? How do you get that voice?
Well, I think it's very difficult, and of course it depends on the organization that you're working in or the people that you're working for. And of course, in big organizations such as Aviva, and I'm sure it's the same at The Economist, I'm sure it's the same at Informa, we have what's called Speak Up. And it gives anybody in the organization the opportunity to speak up when they feel, because it might be that treatment is coming from either people within your direct team or from your boss or from other areas. And that allows, utter confidentiality for that person to speak up and for that to be investigated and looked at and then to take action. And of course, and I can tell you that I have had speak-ups about my own team, very early on, that I dealt with in that way because of issues like that. And I think that leadership obviously comes from the top of the organization. I do get, though, that in some instances, my sister is a head teacher in teaching, or, you reference nannies. I mean, it's very difficult if there isn't the sort of controls and processes around that. So I'm speaking very much from a sort of big corporate organization, but all organizations, particularly in financial services anyway, need that speak up. I mean, you have to have that in place. And I think that does give protection for individuals to speak up. And I know that in Aviva, it's one of those things that we also measure. Do people feel confident to speak up if they call out an issue? And the scores for that are, again, in 92, 93%. It's really high. People do feel confident to do that. It's something that I do track and do monitor, because I think, obviously, it's very, very important that people feel that they can do that.
So I know there are going to be lots more questions here, but I want to end with one that has come in from online. And this is, sadly, will be our last question, but it's from Hayley Roderick. What would your life advice be to your 2 daughters as they grow up in 2024?
I would go back to something I said earlier, and that is about take the opportunities that come to you. Because so many people just look back and say, I wish I had, moved to New York. I wish I had taken the job in that organization. I wish I'd taken a risk on this. And I really feel that unless you have tried, and I have tried and failed, a couple of career moves have not worked out for me, but I just feel like taking that opportunity was a really good thing to do. So to my 2 daughters, I would say that. And by the way, my 2 daughters are very different. One lacks confidence, one is super confident. And it's what opportunity means for you as an individual. But please take the opportunities, because it can make the difference.
Take the opportunities. What a place to end on. Thank you. What a wonderful conversation. Amanda Blanc.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.